All right, our scripture reading today comes from Mark chapter 1, verses 16 to 20. Excuse me, in my ears, Siri is talking to me. She thinks I'm talking to her. Mark chapter 1, verses 16 to 20. As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little further, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boat mending the nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. Okay, let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So 15 people raised their hands. Just keep that in mind as we move forward. Well, hold on, let me pull this out here. So in the announcements of the bulletin, it says this: disciples, looking for 12 people to help start a new religion. If you are interested in helping, see Jesus during coffee hour after synagogue. And then it goes on to say, if you read this announcement, then when I raise my hand just before I preach the sermon, raise your hand. Shh. Let's see how many people raised their hand. And we have 15. So with that in mind, let's go into our sermon. So as we continue our preaching series we've been doing this month, in the middle of the summer when it's just us in the middle of the summertime, it says those dedicated people, we're having conversations of what we need to do to grow the church and reach out to the visitors. So we're continuing our preaching series on how to reach the visitors. Today we're going to focus specifically on invitation. If you look at the sermon title for today, it says moving from announcements to invitation. I personally place very little value in announcements of any kind. Most other ministers I know place very little value in announcements of any kind. On the other hand, most church members in most churches, this isn't just you, this goes across the board, go to any church in America, most church members are under the false impression that announcements are vitally important to church life. Church members in most churches falsely assume that announcements is how we increase involvement in the life of the church. This is simply not true, not even close. Announcements do not get people to attend events they've never been to before. Here's what announcements do. Announcements generally remind people about events that they were already planning to go to in the first place. Announcements remind us of the date and time of events that we were already going to go to in the first place. Announcements tell us what we're supposed to bring to an event we were already supposed to go to. Announcements tell us of any changes in the event that we were already planning to go to. Now, perhaps if there is a brand new announcement that no one knows about, so no one was planning to go to this event, it's a brand new announcement. Well, that announcement is good for the 10 or 15 people in every church who go to everything anyways. They'll read the announcement and go to that event. Those 10 to 15 people. When I begin a Bible study, which I'll be doing this fall, by the way, I can predict with a fair amount of accuracy 90% of the people who will attend that Bible study before I even put an announcement in the bulletin. I already know who's going to be there. If we develop a brand new mission project no one's ever heard of before, so no one's been to it yet, and I put that in the bulletin, before I put it in the bulletin, with a fair amount of accuracy, I can predict which one of you will attend that mission event. The bottom line is, announcements are only meaningful for a small amount of people in the church who are already involved in the things that are listed in the announcements. If anyone else in the church even looks at the announcements, let's say you went home and we had a 16th birthday or a 16th person who read the announcements at home, or a 17th or an 18th. Those people are probably reading the announcements just out of curiosity of what's going on in the life of the church. And when a first-time visitor reads our announcements, they're trying to see the activities of this church. Is this the kind of church I want to be a part of? So they're reading to see, do we have an activity listed for children and youth? Do we have activities like Bible studies or small group? But even though our visitor is looking through the announcements to see how active our church is, visitors rarely join any of these activities simply based off of what they read in the announcements. Now, this doesn't mean that the announcements serve no purpose at all. They serve a purpose, but that purpose is not getting people involved in the church. The primary purpose for church announcements is to communicate the details and reminders to those of you who are already involved and we're going to go anyway. So if announcements do not get people involved in the life of the church, then how do we get people involved in the life of the church? Well, there's 3 steps I'm going to walk you through. It's a very 3-step process, very simple 3-step process of how to get people involved in the life of the church. Step 1, invite. Step 2, invite. Step 3, invite. Invite, invite, invite. When Jesus was looking for his disciples, Jesus did not put an announcement in the Galilee Gazette. That is passive, hopeful thinking. Jesus actively went out looking for people. After actively looking for people, Jesus personally talked with them. And then Jesus gave them a personal invitation to get involved. If we want visitors to walk through the doors of this church, it's simple. Just invite them. They'll come. We just need to invite people. That's actually the easy part. We always get focused on, we need to invite people. That's the easy part. Do you realize that we have had at least one first-time visitor just about every Sunday for the past 2 months? They've been coming in here. We've not even hit our big fall membership campaign. We haven't even been trying. You know, it's summertime. Our church is crawling to a slow, crawl, barely doing things, barely doing, surviving the heat. Most churches kind of go into this hibernation mode in the summertime. In this hibernation mode, we're still getting visitors every Sunday. And I know that many of those visitors came here from personal invitations of other visitors. I know who came, and I know who invited them to come to this church. But inviting people to try this church for the first time, that's the easy part. And if you invite them, they'll come. Where most churches fail is when it comes to connecting those visitors into the life of the church. I wasn't going to say this in my sermon. I said it in my master plan video. But do you realize that over the past 10 years, if you look at the church stats, you brought in 100 new members in the past 10 years, over 100 new members in the past 10 years. Look around. That's not just visitors. That's the members who joined the church. It's not inviting them, bringing new members in, it's keeping the members. That's the hard part in every church. It's not just that's the hard part in every church, is keeping the members. Most churches fail to get people involved in the life of the church, and they fail because they're under the false impression that somehow announcements in the bulletins is the magic trick that's going to get these visitors involved in the life of the church. Over the course of time, the announcements in the bulletin only serve as a reminder to the new members of all the activities going on at the church that no one ever invited them to. I'm going to say that again because that's critical line. That's a critical line for this sermon. Over the course of time, the announcements in the bulletin only serve as a reminder to the newer members of all the activities going on at the church that no one ever invited them to attend. And that goes for churches across the country. This is like a standard thing that happens. Rarely does a visitor show up to an activity cold, without any personal invitation of any kind. It's not that it never happens. I'm sure it's racking your brain. Well, I know a person who did this, or I did that. You know, okay, there's exceptions to the rule, but it's not the norm. It's not that it never happens, but it's very rare. Showing up to an event takes an invite. We need to invite, invite, invite. That's the key. But when we finally get the courage to invite others, we need to extend that invitation to invite that other person out of their best interest in mind. This is another failure for most churches. This is, again, a common church disease. That when people invite people to an event, when it happens, it doesn't happen that often, unfortunately, in many churches, but when they do invite people to an event, they invite them out of a self-serving motive. I need an extra person to serve on my committee. I need an extra person to bring a potato salad to the event or whatever, you know. And so whatever I need, I'm asking you out of my need. That's not an invite. If we remember the sermon a couple of weeks ago where we talked about the demons we carry inside and we're hiding from others, and we talked about people coming to the church, that every person walking through the doors of the church as a new visitor are coming in with their own personal pains, that they have their own personal wants and needs, and that's what drove them to our church in the first place. And along with those personal needs, each one of those persons has a unique set of talents and gifts and interests where they would like to be involved. As active church members, we might need more people for our cause, whatever our cause is, but that visitor may not be interested in our cause, whatever that is. They might be interested in another ministry going on at the church or somewhere else. Do not talk a visitor into fulfilling our needs. Help the visitor connect with those activities that are going on in the church that align with their personal wants and needs. Now, I know the big question is, how in the world will we know what their wants and needs are? They're a stranger. It's their first time in the church. I don't know anything about them. How would I know what their wants and needs are? She finished my sermon. Talk with them, ask them, engage them in conversation. Ask them straight out, what are your interests? What are your hobbies? What brought you to church today? I've mentioned this to committees and groups and the Stephen ministers. If you ask a visitor the one simple question, you all need to be trained. This is your new member training right now. If you ask a visitor, what brought you to church today? Sometimes, occasionally, they'll give you a vague answer. More often than you would expect, they just, because they're coming in so pressure cookered with whatever the demons are inside, whatever their needs are, whatever's going on in their life, whatever that big event was that brought them here, they'll just pour it out to a total stranger. It's amazing. I've watched this happen too many times and know that this is a common thing. It might be just that they moved, and it's not, a deep, but they're going to tell you all about their move then, and where they came from and whatever. But if it's a pain, you'd be surprised at how much a visitor opens up to you of whatever pain brought them into church and they've never met you, because they're dying for someone to listen. And so just ask someone what brought you to church today. And they might give you a vague answer. Oh, I'm looking for a church. Well, yeah, okay. They might, but follow up on an exploratory question. And it won't take too many exploratory questions before they just start to really pour forth their information. No, they might be private, and then, let them be private. But you'd be surprised. People want to share their story. So to find out how we know what their gifts are, what their interests are, what their pains are, what they're looking for in a church, just engage them in conversation and really get to know them. A deep conversation, not that surface, hi, hello, welcome to the church, but get to know them. And then if you find out that their interest doesn't align with your interest, but they said, well, I like to sing, well, please introduce them to Troy, okay? Yeah, there's over there. So Troy can integrate them into the music program here. If they're interested in community service, invite them to one of our community service projects. And do you know something? Going to one of our community service projects may not be your thing. It's not to be ashamed of. We all have different interests. Some people love doing that, and some people don't love doing that. But if you meet a visitor who likes to do that, you can A, introduce them to someone who does do that, or even if it's not your thing, for the service of the church and the service of that person, take that person to that service project even though you're not into it. Say, hey, I'll pick you up on Thursday night. We'll go to this thing. And then go together and be a servant to that person. So whatever they're interested in, find out what it is, engage them in conversation, figure out who in the church you need to be connecting them with now, and what events you connect them with. And then the next step is easy. Invite, invite, invite. But extending the invitation based on their interests and not our own self-interest is the key. And when we think of inviting others to join these activities, we're thinking of the new visitors, the newer members in the church, especially when we're in the middle of a preaching series of reaching the visitors. But we also need to begin with who's already here. I know I've heard Pastor Luis say multiple times, and I've actually even repeated him in other sermons in the past, that any organization has 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. That's absolutely correct. That is a solid stat. But I'm an idealist. I think you've figured that out by now. I'm an idealist. I have hopes for 100% involvement within the church beyond worship. Worship doesn't count. I don't know if you knew that. Worship doesn't count. 100% involvement beyond worship. This means everyone sitting here, everyone watching me online, everyone sleeping in this morning, is expected to chime in and be a part of the life of the church beyond worship. That might sound like a high goal, but to help us reach the goal, I'm going to lower the bar for you to make it more accessible and less daunting. I'm not even asking for 100% involvement for the rest of your life. You're not committing yourself to any long-term commitment. For our short-term goal of this church, what I would like as a very minimum is 100% involvement from everyone here for the next 12 months as we do a push to thrust this church into the next generation. Beginning this fall, we're going to begin with a major campaign trying to bring in new members to this church. To keep those new members engaged, we need to get those new members involved in smaller groups within the church, beyond worship. The only way we can truly get them involved beyond worship is to give them a personal invitation, as we've mentioned many times in this sermon already. But here's the kicker. How in the world can you give someone a personal invitation to be involved in the life of the church beyond worship when you yourself are not involved in the church beyond worship? How can we invite a visitor to a church activity when we ourselves have never been to that church activity, or perhaps even any other church activity for that matter. We're not asking you to be a leader of any activities, unless you want to be. We're not asking you to do any planning for any activity, unless you want to. What we're asking, as far as the 100% participation involves, is show up. Just show up. That alone, if you want to know how can I help transform this church, just show up. And that'll transform this church. Now, showing up begins with worship, but remember, worship doesn't count, but it begins with worship. Do we want this church to grow? I think we all do. We're excited for the possibilities. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that a visitor is more likely to come back a second, third, and fourth time if they come to a worship service and see the worship service full. Just your presence in the worship service to help get the full worship service experience is going to greatly increase our odds at retaining the visitors who try us out. Just show up. So put in an extra effort to come here on Sunday morning, and we can grow the church. I get it. You're busy. Things happen. You're out late. You're partying at birthday parties, whatever. And you're like, okay, but do your best. Like if you're on that morning and you're on the fence, and you say, well, I'd rather not go to church this morning. Think about that visitor coming through, and you can change their life by just showing up and being another person in the pews. Adding to the events that go on at the church. The second thing is not just showing up to the church service. That doesn't count. It's showing up beyond the church service. So what would you like to be involved in? And being involved in anything else other than worship is going to greatly increase our chances of retaining the visitors. The larger and more dynamic our choir is, the greater chances we have at retaining a visitor. They're going to be here in church and seeing a dynamic choir. They might want to join the choir. Or maybe they're not a singer, but they just love the many voices that are in the choir. So if you join the choir, you're adding to the dynamic value of this church. If you're a family with children, just showing up anywhere in this church is going to help us out. You show up and another family with children comes into this church, and they see your family and another family and another family, and they're going to see that this church has children. If it just happens to be a Sunday, and that happens, we've seen it happen here, where all of our young families clearly are doing something else that day, and then if that's a Sunday where we have a visiting family, then it's going to be harder to attract them back than if we have a Sunday where all of our families are coming. So just showing up makes all the difference in the world for growing this church. If we invite someone to a small group, the small group that meets every once a month, if 20 people are at that small group and we have a dynamic evening, like the group we had for the birthday party yesterday, if it's just full of energy and a lot of people, a lot of love, boy, the chances of them coming back is skyrocketed, right? If that small group kind of has 5 people show up that night, which sometimes you have highs and lows, and that visitor showed up that night, and you spend half the night making excuses of why no one else showed up that night, it's a good chance that visitor is not going to return because people didn't show up. If you just show up, 12 months, I'm just asking for 12 months to put a thrust in this church, to really get that activity level going up. We just need to show up. You don't need to plan anything. You don't need to lead anything. Unless you want to, just show up and sit there. And you'll change the church just by doing that bare minimum. And don't forget the longtime members of this church. Even the longtime members need an invitation to the events that's been going on at this church. In fact, in some ways, maybe even in a weird way, even more. If they've been coming here for 10 years and hasn't gone to this event, there's a wall that's kind of built, invisible psychologically. No one hates anyone. Nothing's bad's going on, just a wall. And they might need a little extra help to come to that event that they've never been a part of, to go into a group, a clique, or whatever that is something they haven't been a part of. So make sure that we're inviting other church members. It's going to begin with us. If you attend any events, Sunday school, small groups, any other activities, start inviting your friends. Use your passing of the peace time. You got 2 minutes to invite someone to whatever event that you think that they would enjoy. During coffee hour afterwards, be using that not just to talk about what movie you saw last night, which, by the way, for me, it was the Barbie movie, but that's a side note. But going out and inviting them to whatever, event that you think that they might enjoy and talk about, but get them involved, other church members, other friends. If we're going to grow this church, we need all hands on deck. I need all of you, every one of you. There's just no exceptions. Every one of you. We need you all involved. If you don't want to get involved, if you don't want to get sucked into the bureaucracy of a church, great. I get it. I'm a minister. I get not wanting to do that. Just show up. The third time in a sermon, you don't have to plan anything or lead. Just show up. Basic level of involvement is going to do two important things for the life of this church. It will make whatever group that you are attending stronger, more vital, and more appealing to others. And second, it's going to give you an opportunity to invite. It is nearly impossible to authentically invite a visitor to be involved in the life of the church beyond worship when you yourself are marginally involved at best. Jesus grew his ministry through invitation. He personally went out and actively looked for his disciples, and he asked them to join him. To grow this church, we must do the same. We'll leave today with two questions that you have to answer. First, how will you personally become more involved in the life of the church? Pick anything, but pick something. How will you be more involved in the life of the church? And second, whether it's coming to the church for the first time or going into a small group activity, get the name in your mind. Who will you invite? Amen.
The invitation we have that comes from our prayer this morning is essentially what Pastor Brad has just shared with us. It comes from the Chinook family of tribes along the Columbia River in Oregon. They were invited to become a part of the United States as a recognized tribe in 2001. And then because of a change in administration in Washington, D.C., that was rescinded. So since 2002, they have been trying to become a recognized tribe in our nation. And they have not succeeded. So it takes more than just one attempt to recognize people. It's a process that goes on. So hear this very simple, little short prayer that the Chinook people offer to us as we close our service today. May all we say and all we think be in harmony with you, God within us, God beyond us, maker of the trees. Amen.